What if Robert Baratheon survived the hunting accident, but Ned Stark still met his tragic fate at the hands of the Lannisters? The survival of Robert Baratheon would change the course of Westeros's political landscape, but it wouldn't be without its own set of challenges. The death of Ned Stark, however, would still send shockwaves through the Seven Kingdoms, particularly in the north. This alternate timeline would see a much more stabilized Baratheon rule. But with the fragile web of alliances that had been carefully woven over the years beginning to fray, Robert Baratheon, the once impulsive and reckless king, would have continued his reign, but his rule would be different. With his life preserved, Robert would have had a chance to strengthen his position on the throne. The question remains, would he become a more competent king, or would his indulgent nature continue to plague him? One thing is for certain. His survival would prevent the immediate chaos that followed his death, including the War of the Five Kings. The Lannisters, still entrenched in their pursuit of power, would have to contend with a stronger Baratheon rule. While Robert's continued reign would bring temporary stability to Westeros, his inability to rule effectively, driven by his personal excesses, would still create significant challenges. His deep aversion to politics, coupled with his reliance on his advisors, would have left key decisions in the hands of others, including the ever-ambitious Tywin Lannister. Without Robert's death, Tywin would have had less of an excuse to directly influence the throne. But his power within the realm would continue to grow. The fate of the Lannisters. With Robert still on the throne, the Lannisters would have had to adjust their strategies. The Lannisters, particularly Tywin, had been forced into political gamesmanship after Robert's death, with Cersei, Jaime, and Joffrey each attempting to manipulate events in their favor. However, in this alternate timeline, Tywin would have been less able to manipulate the throne directly, as Robert would still have a say in the kingdom's matters. That being said, Tywin would still continue his subtle, maneuvering behind the scenes, leveraging his influence over his children to secure his family's hold on power. The implications for Cersei Lannister would be profound. Without the political chaos caused by Robert's death and Joffrey's controversial parentage, Cersei's manipulative nature would have to adapt. While Robert would likely never fully trust her, his survival would provide her with more time to build her own influence within the court. Still, Cersei would struggle to maintain her grip on power, particularly as her father Tywin would work from the shadows, constantly seeking to improve the Lannister family's standing. Jaime Lannister's path would also have been affected by Robert's survival. Having already struggled with his own moral compass and the family's role in the kingdom, Jaime's future would be much different without the immediate collapse of Robert's reign. His relationship with Cersei would still be the key to his political involvement. But Jaime would have had the opportunity to forge his own identity, particularly after Robert's eventual death. The Stark family's struggles without Ned. In the north, the death of Ned Stark would still be a turning point. Ned's fate was sealed when he chose honor over politics, and his execution at the hands of the Lannisters was a moment that shattered the Stark family's hold on the north. Without Ned's presence as a stabilizing force, the Stark children would have been left without the guidance of their father, making their already perilous position even more difficult. Robb Stark, thrust into leadership after his father's death, would have been forced to fight for the North's survival, but he would lack the political insight his father possessed. Robb's decision to rebel would still happen, but without Ned's wisdom, his rebellion would be less strategically sound. The alliances Robb formed would be more fragile, and his success in the War of the Five Kings would be uncertain. While his military prowess was unmatched, Robb's lack of experience in navigating Westerosi politics would be a major obstacle. The power vacuum left in the wake of Ned's death would be one that Robb could not fully fill, and his vulnerability would be exploited by Tywin Lannister and the other southern houses. Catelyn Stark, too, would have found herself isolated. Without her husband's leadership, Catelyn would have been less able to make the decisions necessary to safeguard her family's future. Her grief over Ned's death would cloud her judgment, and her decision to imprison Tyrion Lannister would only serve to further alienate her from potential allies. While her loyalty to her children would remain unwavering, Catelyn's inability to navigate the political intricacies of the South would leave her and her family in an increasingly difficult position. The War of the Five Kings. While Robert's survival might have delayed the onset of the War of the Five Kings, the event would likely have still occurred. The power struggle between the Lannisters, Starks, Baratheons, and other noble houses would have been inevitable, especially after Robert's eventual death. His survival would have given the Lannisters more time to consolidate their power, but the growing resentment toward the Baratheon rule, particularly from the Tyrells and Martells, would have eventually triggered a larger conflict. The main difference would be that the war would have been fought under different circumstances. With Robert still on the throne, the alliances and betrayals would have been more carefully calculated, and the Lannisters would have been forced to fight more strategically. The Tyrells, no longer having to worry about Joffrey's legitimacy, would likely have aligned with House Baratheon to maintain their influence. The Martells, too, would have been biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Without the immediate chaos caused by Robert's death, the conflict would have been more methodical, and the eventual victor would depend on how well each faction could adapt to the changing landscape. The death of Ned Stark still marks a crucial turning point in the Stark family's journey. Even with Robert Baratheon alive, the power dynamics in Westeros are irrevocably altered by the absence of the Stark patriarch. Robb Stark, already thrust into leadership, must face the harsh reality of leading his family in the North without the steady hand of his father. Without Ned's wisdom, Robb's military success in the War of the Five Kings would be more challenging. The alliances he forms would lack the depth and political strength his father could have cultivated. His youthful arrogance, while motivating his soldiers, might cloud his ability to make wise decisions in the complex political games of Westeros. Robb's campaign to resist the Lannisters would still unfold, but without the political acumen of Ned, Robb's chances for victory would be increasingly slim. His ability to rally support from the South would be more difficult, and key alliances, such as those with House Tyrell or even House Martell, would be far less likely. The North, which could have been a united front under Ned's guidance, would now face division and unrest as Robb struggles with both leadership and the war. His decisions would be questioned by those who once stood loyally by his father, leaving him vulnerable to political maneuvering from the Lannisters and other noble houses. In the capital, Cersei Lannister's control over her son Tommen would be more pronounced, but even she would feel the absence of her father, Tywin. While Tywin had always kept the Lannister family's power well in hand, Cersei was less capable of managing the intricate web of politics in King's Landing. Robert's survival would mean that the political stability she had fought for would be less solid than it seemed. Her desperation to protect her children and secure the throne would make her more vulnerable to Tywin's manipulations, as he would continue to steer the family's political power from behind the scenes. Jaime Lannister, torn between his loyalty to his family and his own moral struggles, would be forced to confront his path in a world where Robert still sits on the throne. His relationship with Cersei would grow even more strained, as his growing feelings for Brienne of Tarth clash with his duty to his family. Without the collapse of Robert's reign, Jaime's quest for personal redemption would take longer, and his actions within the Lannister army and in King's Landing would be marked by internal conflict. Jaime would eventually face a choice: remain loyal to the Lannisters or pursue his own honor and identity, which would take him away from his family's deadly politics. Tyrion Lannister's position would also shift in a world where Robert's survival means the Lannisters have more power, but Tywin's absence still leaves them vulnerable. Tyrion, whose intellect had always been a tool for navigating the kingdom's politics, might have found a way to take greater control over his own fate. His relationship with his family, particularly Cersei, would be even more strained, but his wit and ability to manipulate events might serve him better as he works behind the scenes to secure his own future. His rise to prominence, free from the looming threat of execution, would likely be marked by complex negotiations with other noble houses, as he seeks to use his influence to push back against his family's hold on power. Meanwhile, with Robert on the throne, the political struggles between the houses of Westeros would continue. The Tyrells, whose marriage to Joffrey gave them significant power, would continue to maneuver in King's Landing, seeking to secure a position of influence under Tommen. However, without the storm of chaos caused by Robert's death and the fallout from Joffrey's illegitimacy, the Tyrells would have to rely more on cunning and strategic alliances to secure their status. Their influence over Tommen would grow, but they would face constant resistance from the Lannisters, as well as other ambitious houses. In the north, the situation would remain tense, as Robb Stark, though a capable military leader, struggles to govern and unite the disparate factions under his control. Without Ned's experience in diplomacy, the Stark family would face more difficulties in navigating the political landscape of Westeros. The North would continue to rebel against the Lannisters, but Robb's quest for vengeance might lead him to make decisions that fracture his alliances with other houses, particularly House Karstark and House Umber. His lack of political experience could cost him dearly as the war drags on. With the Lannisters and Starks locked in a brutal war, other houses like the Martells and Greyjoys would seize the opportunity to further their own agendas. The Martells, still reeling from the death of Oberyn, would use the unstable situation in the capital to plot their revenge against the Lannisters and try to secure a place for House Martell in the shifting balance of power. Meanwhile, the Ironborn would continue their raids, seeking to expand their control over the west and the north, but the absence of Robert's active involvement in the war would give the northern houses more room to maneuver. The fate of Westeros, with Robert still on the throne, but Ned Stark's death echoing through the power dynamics, would become even more uncertain. The death of Ned would leave a void in the north, making it harder for House Stark to unite and secure their position. Robb Stark would still have the potential to lead, but without the political stability provided by his father's wisdom, his path would be fraught with peril. Across the realm, key characters would wrestle with their own fate. Arya Stark, who had been driven by vengeance since her father's death, would continue her journey of self-discovery. She would seek justice, but with a destabilized political landscape, Arya's path would be less about revenge and more about survival. Her role in the shifting power dynamics of Westeros would become more pronounced as she grows into a formidable force in her own right, shaping the future of the Seven Kingdoms. Jon Snow, still a member of the Night's Watch, would have his future in the realm changed as well. With the political chaos from the south beginning to escalate, Jon's role in the defense of Westeros would grow. The Wall would be his primary focus, but the shifting political landscape would ultimately push him into a more significant role, where his choices could tip the scales in the coming conflict. The future of Westeros, even with Robert alive, would still be marked by turmoil and war. While Robert's survival might have temporarily stabilized the throne, the complex web of politics, family feuds, and wars would continue to tear the realm apart. The North, House Stark, and the Lannisters would continue to clash, with alliances constantly shifting and the Iron Throne remaining in jeopardy.